great also to have the company still of Conservative commentator Benedict Spence. Good morning once again to you.
Good morning.
Just to get you up to date what we're going to be talking about in this hour, 700 UK troops have been deployed to the Mediterranean to prepare for a Dunkirk-style rescue operation of some 10,000 Brits who are still in Lebanon. They have been ordered to leave the country if they can. Flights on commercial airlines still available, told to get out. Also, we're going to talk about Keir Starmer telling a Labour Party conference yesterday before he flew to New York that the state will take more control over people's lives. Do we want the state to have more control of people's lives? Plus, trade unions have just been voting against, we believe, winter fuel payment cuts this morning on the final day of Labour conference. And disgraced TV presenter Philip Schofield is going to be back on our screens. He's secretly filmed with Channel 5 a new show about being a castaway alone on an island for 10 days. Will this be the start of his rehabilitation? We'll talk about that. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Benedict Spence, I do want to get your thoughts on women and prisoners, because we talked about that, and if you just tuned in, we just missed a really interesting conversation with a former women's prison governor about that. But let's just start with what is going on with Lebanon.
Sure.
We've had Hezbollah firing rockets into northern Israel for, the last 11 months, since October the 8th. I wonder why they suddenly decided to do that in support of Hamas fighters. By the way, before any retaliation by Israel for that Hamas massacre on October the 7th. But now Israel is doing more than just tit-for-tat retaliation. That extraordinary and audacious, utterly brilliant, let's be honest, James Bond-esque blowing up of pages and then walkie-talkies. People calling that a war crime. Clearly not. It was the most targeted you could possibly imagine, taking out, we believe, 1 in 30 Hezbollah militants of a prescribed terrorist group. I say, well done, chaps in Mossad. But now we're looking at this escalation, rockets firing. Almost 600 people, we're told, by the Lebanese Health Ministry dying in southern Lebanon as a result of those Israeli attacks. By the way, same number of rockets coming back. They're just not able to kill people in Israel because they've got the Iron Dome. They're still trying. Prime Minister has said, get out of Lebanon. If you're British, you need to leave Lebanon now. There are commercial flights, get out. But these 700 Royal Marine commandos, sailors, combat engineers being deployed to the Mediterranean overnight, plus the Air Force as well. Basically, if we need to do an evacuation, if it all goes off. But really, if you are able to leave Lebanon right now, you're British, you should just get the hell out under your own steam, shouldn't you? You
should, and you have a duty to do that, actually, to lessen the risk to the members of the armed forces that will otherwise have to go in, because they will be considered legitimate targets by Hezbollah and other affiliated militia, especially others operating not inside Lebanon but across, maybe in Syria or further afield. They'll be considered completely legitimate targets. There is also, as much as people like to think that wars nowadays are like video games, there is the very high possibility of friendly fire. The IDF are very good, but they are not perfect. There is every chance that they may end up hitting British civilians or British forces as an accident in an active combat zone, because, as I say again, when we talk about precision targeted or this, that and the other, it is not like you're playing Call of Duty. It's still like a war zone. I think one of the things we've become very aware of in the last year is that apparently most people are completely unaware of the realities of war, and it's come as a complete surprise to them that innocent people die in wars. Particularly children. The absolute, complete and utter revelation. The idea for killing fewer civilians per head than we did in Iraq or Afghanistan.
Or any war we've
basically, they are taking the latest technology, the latest approaches. They're using all of their intelligence to get the best possible picture of the build-up. And people still seem to believe that if you kill just one civilian, it is the most horrific, fascistic war crime you can possibly imagine. Is that because they have no concept of how wars work, or is it because it's Israel? I mean, it's 6-1, half an the other. But people, genuinely, it amazes me just how divorced from reality people can be about wars. Wars are dreadful. Wars kill so many people.
There's a reason, actually, why most people who've been to war and your military leaders, they are usually, they're not the warmongers. They've seen the reality of it, which we get as armchair generals get not to actually see, and we don't have the vivid nightmares and the post-traumatic stress disorder they have. There's a reason why our grandfathers, when they went to war, they didn't talk about it when they came back because what they had seen was so horrific. These are the people who are trying to prevent wars. But this is this interesting thing. I mean, it just seems to me, our military men and women shouldn't be put at risk because people haven't left the country. But then we did have a call from one of our listeners earlier, George. He's married to a Lebanese man, both living here in the UK. But his husband has got the right to live in this country, but his elderly parents don't, there'll be a lot of people. We saw this in Gaza as well. I mean, look, we had this with even with the former SNP leader and First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf, his wife's family in Gaza, and somehow miraculously they were able to get out.
Well,
just roughly a day after a large donation was made to a human rights organisation.
We had this
pure coincidence, by the way, pure coincidence.
Also with Sudan as well. But part of the problem is if you have a bit of a chaotic situation, people just being loaded onto planes, you also run the risk of people who actually have no right of coming to the UK getting on board because they're relatives of XYZ people, because soldiers are not actually going to turn people away at gunpoint unless things are really bad, as we saw in Afghanistan. It has to get to a really bad situation, which you want to avoid by saying to people, if you have a right or you have a concern, get out. As I say, this has been going on for a year now, and even before then, Lebanon was not a safe country, it was not a stable country. If you don't actually plan for the worst case scenario, as many Jews across the world do, they always have bags ready to go, lots of families.
I know so many Jewish people who've got that here in England.
Yeah,
absolutely
if
horrifying.
you don't prepare for that situation, I'm sorry, but there are limits to the sympathy that we can give, and you've had a year's notice.
That's kind of where I am, indeed, absolutely. Look, let's come back to what's been happening here. We had a lot of notice. You'd think, actually, Labour Party had quite a lot of notice they were going to be the next government. They didn't know when the election would be called, but they knew it would have been this year. They seem to be remarkably unprepared for actually coming into power on July the 5th. But Keir Starmer yesterday, in his first keynote speech as Prime Minister Labour Party conference, talked about quite extraordinary things about how the state is going to take back control of people's lives. He doesn't mean giving us more control. He said when he left the palace and arrived in Downing Street the first time in July, he said he wanted to tread more lightly on your lives. Which I thought was extraordinary in contrast to what he had to say to Labour Party conference yesterday. I don't normally like to do this to you, as you know, but I'm going to play you 43 seconds of Keir Starmer. I'm apologising for every single second of this. However, it's important to hear the man's words from his own mouth. Here's what he had to say yesterday.
Now, don't get me wrong. Markets are dynamic. Competition is a vital life force in our economy. This is a Labour Party proud to say that. We work hand in hand with business. But markets don't give you control. That's almost literally their point. So if you want a country with more control, if you want the great forces that affect your community to be better managed, whether that's migration, climate change, law and order, or security at work, then that does mean more decisive government. And that is a Labour government. Taking back control is a Labour argument.
3, 2, 1, back in the room. Just can't resist saying that. You find yourself just sort of going into this sort of dreamlike state, don't you? Has the man stopped talking yet? Anyway, what he actually said was really quite scary because, pathetic, this sort of little device of using this phrase, take back control from vote leave, which people voted for, trying to win back Brexiteer voters who were never going to trust that man in an inch of their lives because that man then spent 3 years trying to stop a democratic vote being enacted if it wasn't for Boris Johnson getting in 2019 to actually get Brexit done. But also this idea, when we talk about wanting a government in control, we mean controlling the borders, we mean controlling crime, so our streets are safe, we mean, running an adequate health service. I don't think we're expecting more than adequate at this point. Decent education, not allowing the NHS to sort of cut the girls' breasts off because they've been told they're actually a boy. I mean, that would work for me in terms of control. Not the, you can't have a cigarette outside in a beer garden of a pub. You can't see this advert at this time. And the level of control they're looking at, and freedom of speech. You can't say things that we believe not to be true. Well, you tell us things that aren't true all the time. Because, genuinely, one other thing he said in the speech, I think it's extraordinary. He said, it's not possible to have both low taxes and good public services. Didn't mention that in the campaign. No, and
when you say, when he says tread more lightly on people's lives, that doesn't mean that he won't reduce the surface area. In fact, he might just expand it. So we're going to have very sort of low-level policies like smoking bans that are completely functionally useless but irritate people, but not actually get to grips with the big things in life, like, social care or whatever it is. So he will have a greater remit of control over your life, but they'll have a lot less of a tangible impact, unless it comes to tax, in which case they're taking as much of that as they can.
I'm free marketeer, but I completely understand you need regulation of markets. You need to have, anti-monopoly rules.
Yeah.
You need to have, clearly we needed more regulation of the financial markets.
You need to stop hostile states from getting too much influence.
Yeah, I'm all in favour of that. But largely, let the market decide. Well, they're not letting that happen in the climate change issue. They're not letting the market decide when it comes to planning
or healthcare,
or schooling.
Yeah.
There's virtually no one who have paid for their child's education every tens of thousands pounds. If they had a decent local school nearby.
Yeah.
I mean, give me a break. These people aren't idiots, for goodness sake. But there's the thing. It's just about this sort of minutiae. This idea that the state knows better when it has been proven again and again and again. The state really doesn't know better most of the time.
Yeah, it's the same old Labour. It's that ideology that actually they know what's best for people. Whatever iteration of Labour it is, they believe that they know what's better and that they are going to clamp down on it. And it's wicked in a way, actually. It's amusing, but darkly so, that they've taken the Vote Leave sort of slogan about control and saying, but this is what you wanted. You voted for more control and we're giving it to you.
Yeah, exactly.
And, from the arch Europhile, of course.
Well, you do fundamentally come back. We spoke to a Labour representative earlier about this. You fundamentally come back to this sort of battle between, what is the thing you value highest and what is the thing you value but don't value as high. And that's between liberty and equality.
Yeah.
And for Labour, it's equality, 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 even if it means everybody going down to a lower level, because that's the only way you get it.
Yeah.
If you want all kids to have an equal start in life, then all those parents who've been reading to their kids and having a bedtime and getting up on a wet Sunday morning and taking them to park at 8 a.m, we all remember those days.
Yeah.
You need to stop doing that. You need to put your kid in front of the telly and give them sweets for breakfast.
Yeah.
Because if that's what the worst parents are doing, you need to do that. Otherwise, your kid will have an advantage. That's what you call that. Okay.
If one person's kid has ADHD, everybody will have ADHD.
Eventually,
whatever
everyone will have
Yeah,
ADHD. It's just called bad parenting,
as
we all know. But if you care about liberty, my thing is liberty has to include the right to make bad choices, the right to do things that aren't good for you, maybe not good. Now, where they impinge on other people, so for instance, smoking. If you want to smoke cigarettes, I hate cigarettes. I think it's crazy to smoke cigarettes, but it's none of my sodding business unless you are doing it in my face.
Yeah.
And bothering me, putting my health at risk or making it uncomfortable.
Yeah, I even disagree with the ban on having smoking areas indoors. I think actually, you don't want to be sat next to somebody the whole time, but why not actually have a separate space? I don't see what that was so bad about that. Secondhand smoke is a negligible thing.
That was a staff
Yeah, I
issue.
know, but still, it was one of those things where it's a consumer's choice.
Yeah.
Actually, what is the problem?
But is it the staff's choice? That's the key thing.
I'd far rather smell cigarettes in an old pub than the lavatories, and that tends to be what we've replaced them with.
That is the choice, isn't it? I want to hear from you on this, because Keir Starmer said the state will take more control of people's lives under this Labour government. What is your reaction to that? Give us a call, 03499 1000, text on 87222. You can get in touch on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs one standard network rate message. Let's also, just forgot to play it just because we've got the clip and it just makes me laugh. Keir Starmer making an earnest plea about what's going on in the Middle East. Here's what he had to say yesterday.
I call again for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the return of the sausages.
He actually did say the return of the sausages when he meant the hostages. He quickly corrected himself. I don't know why we cut out the word hostages after that, but it's just it's quite bizarre. That is such a weird slip of the tongue, especially when you've got an autocue.
Yeah, I felt a little bad for him because this is obviously his first keynote speech as Prime Minister, and it was perhaps the most delicate part of the speech, so to get it wrong.
These are people being held hostage.
You can sort of imagine, though, what he will have done is that in his mind he will have been trying to go, don't get it wrong, don't get it wrong. And of course, if you fixate too much, you end up getting it wrong. And, this is not necessarily a reflection on his capacity as somebody who can speak or make policy or anything like that. But my word, doesn't it just underpin how we were told 83 days ago that the grown-ups were back in charge, and it's the same litany of mishaps and bad policy that we had under the Tories. We're not being given the idea, the impression that they are in control. James Mathewson was earlier on saying, look, some departments have policies, not all of them do. And as you said, it's not as if it was a secret that we were going to have an election this year and that they were probably going to win. They should have been a little bit more prepared.
It's quite bizarre. But again, saying things is so easy. Doing stuff. I think this is going to be the downfall for Keir Starmer is, A, they're hypocrites, B, their inclinations are actually all against the fundamental sort of values of the majority of British people, which is why Labour, despite the absolutely catastrophic, appallingly poorness of the last few Tory governments did actually not actually get more than 34% of the vote. That tells you something.
Yeah.
They only had to be vaguely competent to have won. They got the MPs, but they didn't get the actual votes. It's just a vagary of our system. But I think fundamentally it's just that they think that saying things is a replacement for doing things, and actually doing's a lot harder, a lot less glam. Less reports. One other thing I want to get to before we take a break, and that is the conversation we had with a former prison governor about Labour saying they want to send fewer women to jail. This is Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, yesterday. They said that jail isn't working for women. It's less than 3,500 women behind bars, largely for non-violent crimes. You have very few violent. But the argument seems to be that sort of, well, they haven't committed violent crimes, so they shouldn't be behind bars, but they're committing prolific offences.
Yeah, she gave two examples. One was repeated theft and also fraud, which, fraud is stealing. Yeah. This is in the Bible, this is in the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not steal. Why? Because it leads to violence. It's a violation of your property that if it goes unchecked, it leads to violence, it leads to assault, it leads to murder. All of society knows this throughout history. If you allow one, it eventually escalates to another. And,
if I stopped you stealing my stuff, what would you then do?
It's not acceptable to say that these so-called non-violent crimes are therefore tolerable, because they're not actually non-violent. If you're invading someone's space and taking their property, that is an act of violence.
But also this idea that women are permanent victims.
Oh, of course, yes.
And also that, they've got kids. Well, a lot of the guys behind bars have got kids as well. Here's the question. Are these mothers the best people for their kids? A lot of them, again, they're with abusive partners. They've got drug problems, alcohol problems. Well, I'm not entirely sure these kids are necessarily in the best place with their mums not behind bars.
Perpetual victims, unless, of course, they've said something politically untoward on social media, in which case they do need to go to prison very quickly.
Absolutely, got to have rules. Got to have rules. Benedict Spence, thank you very much.